our first speaker, who is Jan Lausch, Principal Consultant for Cybersecurity at DNV. Welcome, Jan. Great to have you on the platform today.
Thank you very much. Let's begin. So, as I said, my name is Jan Lausch from DNV, Cybersecurity Consultant there, working in our Cyber Defense Center, and I will be talking to you today about, obviously, social engineering, right? So let's get started. My topic today is Social Engineering 101, Trust and its Limits. And we will cover a number of interesting topics, which you can see here. First of all, I will give you an overview about the sharks which are in the water and how they evolved over the time. Then I will give you a bit of anatomy of what it's like of getting bitten. Then we will look at the million gears where everyone is a piece in the puzzle. Then, if we have time, we will go and look at a real-world example and some nice details about it. And then, most importantly, at the end, I'm going to give you an overview of what to do about all of this to make yourself more secure. Okay, so sharks in the water. Ladies, gentlemen, this slide shows you a greeting from a hacker from yesterday. That lone guy typing away all night with a pizza box by his side, that's not a thing anymore. Doesn't exist anymore, or it's hardly relevant anymore. A few years ago, if your PC had caught a virus, it would probably make your PC be part of a botnet and sending out spam, and that was the end of it. So not too complex. Quite a few attacks today still are like that, but that's not what we must be prepared for anymore. Today's tools, technologies, and skills that formerly were only available to state-level threat actors have become available to general organized crime public, let's say it like that. And because of that, by making tools available, or by tools and technologies getting available, lots of tasks in that field have become automated, industrialized. So what we're seeing right now in the threat actor landscape looks more like this. Basically, it's a mature industry with billions of dollars turnaround, with lots of players that supply each other, each one specializing on certain core capabilities, performing a service, and then passing the customer, meaning your assets that are under attack, to the next stage to someone else. So when we're looking at operating grids, when we work in an industry that's a target for certain players, then this is what we must have in the back of our minds as what the landscape is that we're operating in. And we will not be touching threat landscape today. That's a different topic. But social engineering is basically one tool in the toolbox that is supposed to catch us off guard. But I guess you heard that, so let's get one step further. Let's look at the kill chain, the anatomy of getting bitten. What does that look like? What you see here is kind of an all-purpose model, which is, let me hide this bit here, which is basically mostly true in most of the attacks we see today, the kill chain of a cyber attack. How this usually works. And it doesn't actually matter what kind of attack this is. Usually it's the big takeaway here, it's a process. It's not a one blow that kicks the lights out. It's usually a process that involves multiple steps with multiple tasks that build on top of each other. And first off, again, there is no one size fits it all here. There are still plenty of old style attacks where you basically toss out a new virus and whatever it compromises, that's fine. But that's not what we talk about today. Today, we're looking at more sophisticated attacks, specifically at these two highlighted steps here, reconnaissance and payload. Reconnaissance is basically the task to find out who is an interesting target, who has access to interesting information, financials, mergers, access to operation technology. So what's an interesting target? And payload, well, that means how do I make it more likely that this person will open up, in the sense of social engineering, please remember, will open up and let me in. Literally speaking, open up an infected email attachment or plugging in a USB stick to bring in infected, well, payload. So in order to properly do this, job, we need to, as an intruder, collect information from many sources. You collect it, you refine it until you have a clear picture of what your target is. So from many sources, meaning human sources, who is connected to whom, and we're getting that in a minute, technical sources, and all sorts. And you take them and you process them. And basically from a lot of data points, you gather information, and in the end, you gather intelligence. And why do I call this a million gears? Because it's not only a million pieces in a puzzle or a million data points. It's actually kind of what I call the metadata of our business life. It's a million people. It's like a social graph that Facebook has. It's a million people that know a million things. And if you think that you're not important, if you think that, oh, I'm just kind of, I don't know, the accountant or a project manager, what do I know? What knowledge do I possess? Well, there's actually quite a lot. You know procedures, you know routines, you know phone numbers, you know who reports to whom, you know the names, you know who's in a project with whom, you know who writes often on weekends, or who has access to specific assets, or where client data is stored. So all of this is something that basically everyone in a company knows. So everyone is a target, because everyone can contribute to this big picture of giving the attacker a better understanding of how to attack and how to use this. And what do they do with this picture? Well, how to social engineering. And let me just quickly walk over one example that I just came up with yesterday evening. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but you're probably aware that whenever you connect to a Wi-Fi with your phone or laptop, that it will store actually the credentials to that Wi-Fi. So next time you go to the same location, it will automatically log you in. But what you're probably not aware is that at any given time, your phone or your computer will try to reconnect to that Wi-Fi. So if you are, for example, at home, it will still try to reconnect to all the other places that you have visited recently. And it will do that by actually broadcasting the names of the network that it did connect to. And it will shout out and say, hey, dear Radisson guest network, I miss you so much. Can we please reconnect? Please reach out to me. Or in this case, this is what you see if you listen to that shout out. In this case, you have a device here which recently was connected to all the networks which are highlighted in red here. And it spams them out into the public. And to anyone listening, basically you can learn where that person went over the course of the last time. And what does that mean in practice? Well, it would be pretty romantic if it wouldn't just try to connect to all its mates. This is a list of Wi-Fis that I was connected to over the last months. What can we learn from this? Well, just look at this. Obviously, I was in a hotel. That's the name of a hotel. And that may be, just assume that I'm a CEO involved with negotiating a merger. That hotel may be situated next to my biggest competitor's location. And maybe this is even the guest network of my competitor that I visited. That would be interesting information to gather, right? Or what else do we have? Well, oh, what's that? Interesting. What could that possibly be? Let's perhaps go to a site called wiggle.net and enter the name of this network down here. And let's see what we come up with. Oh, it actually finds this network, and it has actually latitude and longitude of the position where it finds it. What do we have here? Oh, look at that. It's on an island. What do we find? Oh, it's a guest house of YMCA. Well, that's interesting. Mr. Lausch likes to go to YMCA. What can we find out about this? Oh, well, here's the team of that guest house. Let's just take this guy. He must be the head of that house. And let him write an email to Mr. Lausch. Oh, Mr. Lausch, thank you for coming to us. I've attached a couple of interesting documents for you to read. That would make it quite likely for me to open this document, right? Would it be? I would say it would be excused if I would fall for this. Well, usually I don't write to Stefan in English because it's German and I'm as well. But let's skip on that. So this basically how you create an official social engineering attack by investigating the surroundings of your target, the social graph of your target, who he connects to, who he talks to, at what time he writes, the language that he uses, and then use that to create fake communication and make him more likely to open up that specific attachment here, which is of course infected and will make you will compromise you. That's how it works. And if you want to see some example of this, how this works in real life, I've laid them down here under this link. Perhaps you can look at this later. So what do we do with this? Where do we go from here? Why is this effective? It's quite simple. It's effective because all of us are humans, because we are distracted, because we fall for such things. And it's not only actually a flaw of who we are, it's actually an asset of who we are, a good thing of who we are, because we want to trust people. We are actually humans that want to be in a relationship as a social being with other persons. And by doing this, or by wanting this, we want to communicate. We want to communicate and have a general mindset of trust. Look at these two graphics here. On the left-hand side, you find the results of a survey which asks, do you generally assume that most people in your country can be trusted? And you can see, if you zoom in, that the highest number of people saying, I agree to this statement, are from Denmark. Norway is missing here, and Finland, and basically Scandinavia. On the right-hand side, you see basically the number of people that say they have already once fallen or experienced an online scam or online fraud. And it's interesting that it is exactly the same countries. It is Denmark at the very top, Norway on the right-hand side, because they're not in the EU, so they're extra. And then if you compare it further down, you will find the other Scandinavian countries as well, much higher on the list. And that is because by trusting, you open yourself up for such social engineering campaigns. So the very essence of who we are as humans is also a risk. And that is something that we need to have in mind. And what do we do with this now? So how can we basically make sure that this risk is not being exploited? We don't want to create robots. We don't want to basically employ, non-humans. We want to have social life also in our organizations. But in order to be able to cope to these threats, what do we need to do? Well, first off, from organization point of view, spam filters, always a good thing. Spread social engineering and education. Take this presentation, take any kind of training, and just tell people. Encourage a blame-free reporting culture, because if you've got a feeling that something is off, very often it will actually be true. So encourage people to speak up. Do exercises, do trainings about this. It's about the mindset. It's about the mindset that this is a realistic thing that happens every day, everywhere on the planet, and that it exploits the very nature of who you are, and that it's not a bad thing to come forward and report if you know something. So this is basically an organizational point of view. But what I find even more important or interesting is a personal point of view. What do you actually tell people when they ask you? First of all, operate under a zero trust mindset. Whenever a call comes in, an email comes in, always, and that is counterintuitive, always assume that this message may not be legit. Only trust communication that you know is authentic, because it could not be. So if, for example, there is an email coming in asking you to do something, and it's out of order, it's strange, it's irregular, then call the guy, call and verify that it's really him. It's that simple. The second thing relates for this. What social engineers usually will do, usually your communication with your peers, with your colleagues and customers is polite, is direct. It is not made to incite fear or urgency. So when you get a message that tries to make you feel rushed to do something, that tries to raise fear in you, that gives you a feeling of, I need to act fast, this is an emergency. Whenever you get this, this is a very, very good telltale that it might be a social engineering attack. Then call the guy. Don't just act. Stop acting right away. built in a roadblock that stops you from acting right away and from calling back and asking, hey, did you really send this? Is this really legit? These are basically the two most important signs and things to do. Well, then, of course, there is don't provide personal information over email. There is no such thing as irrelevant topics. Then there is procedures. If a company asks you to not, well, do what I just told you, right? To have a roadblock, to have a stop before acting, then this is not something that they do to make your life miserable. It's because someone has thought about this. And it's precisely because they try to have a barrier to stop you from automatically reacting on something harmful. So please adhere to it. And then, most importantly, trust your instincts. If it feels wrong, very often it actually is. So call someone, report it. And again, I want to highlight the top two topics here are the most important. Zero trust mindset and don't feel rushed. Look for signs of threats and urgency in communication. Because most of all, and most importantly of all, cybersecurity, especially regarding social engineering, is a mindset. Thank you very much. I hope I could stick to my time target and bring up some interesting questions here.
Yes, you did very well, Jan. Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation to kick off the afternoon. So Jan, I'm going to ask you to take your seat back in the audience, and then we'll bring you back for the Q&A session in due course. Thank you so much. Okay, and so next up we have Joanna Margarita Abreu, Head of OT Cybersecurity at eRedis, and Miguel Silva, Cybersecurity Analyst, also at eRedis. Hi, Joanna.
Hi, Mandana. Hello, everyone.
Nice to see you. Hi.
Nice to see you as well.
Great.
Hello,
Hi,
everyone.
Miguel.
So, hello, everyone. I am Joana Abreu, and I manage the OT cybersecurity team at eRedis. Here with me, I have my colleague Miguel Silva, who is responsible for planning, creating, and deploying a phishing program.
Hello, everyone.
We are very pleased to be here at this Smart Grid Forums webinar. Also learning from Jan and DNV's experience, and of course to be sharing with you our experience on this topic, on how we at eRedis are addressing cybersecurity in supply chain management, namely regarding our critical suppliers. Because the fact, as the title of this webinar states, is that the art of hacking humans is becoming more sophisticated. So human creativity knows no limit, and we do need to be concerned not only about our own employees, but with everyone who connects to our grid, which is our most critical infrastructure. But before moving on, let me just give you a swift overview of who we are. So eRedis is a Portuguese DSO based in Lisbon. Perhaps you may have heard of eRedis by EDP Distribution. We were formerly named EDP Distribution since we are a part of the EDP Group, which is a global energy player. In terms of numbers, which are relevant, let me just point out that we have 3,000 employees, okay? And we operate more than 400 primary substations scattered throughout mainland Portugal, okay? So we are here to share with you this model that we have implemented. It's still not a framework. We would like to get there in terms of maturity. But for now, it's a suppliers management model. And as you can see, we have this third-party cybersecurity policy in place within our certified ISMS. And also, according to the controls of the ISO 27001, we have established certain phases to address the cybersecurity in our supply chain. And when I talk about supply chain, of course, for DSOs, the supply chain is not only suppliers, okay? Of course, we could talk about customers, producers, TSOs, DERs, But for now, and for the purpose of this presentation, we will focus on what we are implementing regarding our suppliers, and specifically the focus that we give to what we consider to be our critical suppliers. So we have established 3 phases: the pre-contractual one, the contractual, and the monitoring phase. We will focus this presentation more on the monitoring phase and everything that we are doing, bringing awareness to our partners, to our suppliers in terms of cybersecurity. But I will just give you a brief overview of these pieces that we have in the pre-contractual and contractual phase that allow us to have all of these initiatives on the monitoring phase as well. Okay, for instance, in the pre-contractual phase, so when a supplier wishes to become an ADP supplier, it needs to fulfill this questionnaire regarding, well, other topics, but as well as cybersecurity. And at the end, it gives a score to the supplier, okay? And basically what we are implementing now, since we have this tool, is we are defining a minimum cybersecurity score for all that we consider to be our critical services. So if a supplier wishes to provide a critical service to a HIT, it needs to have at least, we are still defining this score at the moment, but the supplier will have to comply with a minimum level, okay? And this questionnaire addresses topics such as compliance, governance model, physical security, risk management, human resources, also suppliers from their side, okay? So it's a holistic and comprehensive questionnaire that our suppliers need to reply. After this piece, of course, the contractual phase is very important. And what we did is we established also within our ISNS formally contractual cybersecurity requirements. We did this with our legal department, okay, so that we are complying also legally with the Portuguese law. And we established cybersecurity requirements for all the contracts that have the need to access our OT network, okay? And these requirements go from general requirements for cybersecurity management, okay? The need to have policies and procedures in place, the need to provide awareness and training to their employees, the need to perform risk management, the need to have an incident management process in place, also business continuity plans, all the technical requirements to access our OT network, which we call IIMC, the fact that if they contract other third parties, they need to get our authorization to do so, our right to audit, and this clause is very important in the next piece that I will be telling you about. And also very important, my colleague Miguel will be sharing this with you, our right to perform phishing campaigns to these suppliers, okay? So the employees of our suppliers who access our OT network, okay? This is what we are doing. Also, we have specific requirements for the security development of systems, if it's applicable, not in all contracts is applicable. And very important, also requirements for correcting or at least helping us remediate vulnerabilities that we find in the systems that they are responsible for. We have this specification, also an holistic specification, very comprehensive in all of our OT contracts. And we also have worked with our legal department a simplified version to put in all RH contracts. Okay, so at this point, all RH contracts have cybersecurity requirements. Okay, what are we doing to monitor if they are complying with these requirements that we are demanding them to comply in the contracts that we have with them? First of all, and just very swiftly, if you remember, we have a clause which allows us to audit our suppliers, okay? And what we are doing now with our internal audit department, so ADP's internal audit department, is auditing every year 2 or 3 suppliers. We are, of course, naturally first focusing on the ones that we consider to be critical. Okay, so the suppliers that provide what we consider to be a critical service, for instance, our SCADA provider. Okay, and we are auditing these suppliers every year. Of course, a sample. We do not have the resources to audit everyone, but we are at least auditing a sampler of these critical suppliers. And our internal audit department is issuing observations, opportunities of improvement, and we are addressing them with our suppliers. Besides that, and now I will let my colleague Miguel talk to you about this. We have a comprehensive training and awareness program on cybersecurity with 6 targeted audiences. And as you can see, we have a 5th level, so level 5, which focuses on precisely training third parties and outsources. Miguel,
yes,
please.
Thank you, Joanna. So as Joanna was saying, our training and awareness program is divided in 6 levels, and each level has a different target audience. So we will drill down a little bit in the 5th level. There is our third parties and outsourcers. We will talk to you a little bit about our initiatives regarding this level. We have a cybersecurity passport, a monthly newsletters. We also have IT and OT phishing campaigns, and we will talk a little bit of everything, and we will try to be very brief. Okay, Joanna, go ahead. So, what is our cybersecurity passport? This passport is a course with a certificate that is available and made available by our Cybersecurity National Center. And we took advantage of this course and made it like a prerequisite to every user of our IIMC, that is the name of our OT network. And this course not only as the workplace dimension, but also have a little bit of cybersecurity hygiene and habits for our homes, and also for exterior, like in a cafe or airports. This course, like I said, has a final certificate that we ask for our users to get. And to get this certificate, the users have to respond correctly to 75% of the quizzes. This cybersecurity passport is a requisite for every user. So this includes, of course, our external partners, and they have to make this course to be able to access our OT network. The next slide have a little bit what are the contents of this course. These slides are in Portuguese, but in this case, it was talking about when we are traveling, we have to be careful about our computers. And Joanna, can you go the next images, please? Yes. We have a video that is in Portuguese, so don't make sense to to show you guys, but was talking about ransomware, and these videos are little animations, like short videos that are pretty engaging and pretty funny to watch. So the people are entertained and are learning in the process. This image is a question of the quiz. As you can see, it's not a difficult quiz. It's just to have a cybersecurity minimum notion of what it is, what is a strong password, what is our digital identity. So in the last picture is the certificate. So this certificate is issued by our National Cybersecurity Center, and we just take advantage of that, and we we use it for every user that access our network.
Miguel, sorry,
Yeah.
just to complement that. This is a free course that is provided by our National Cybersecurity Center for all Portuguese citizens, and we are taking advantage, of course, of this course. But we are also making sure that our National Cybersecurity Center knows that we are using this tool, so that they don't discontinue it. Okay, so if you have a similar tool on your countries, perhaps this could be a good idea to at least make sure that your suppliers, the employees of your suppliers, have the minimum knowledge of cybersecurity.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. Yes, of course. So the next initiative, and one of the most recent ones, is our Cyberbuzz. That is a monthly newsletter. So each month it's a different central topic. And for example, we use this newsletter to not only inform our users, our IMC users, what is a strong password, what is a ransomware, and so on. But we also inform that we have our own policies at house, and which policies do we have regarding the different topics. So, for example, if we are making a newsletter about strong passwords, we'll teach them how to build a strong password, and also what passwords redes demand for all users. This cybersecurity buzz is for all of IMC users. So once more, our external partners have this sent to their email too. Okay, now talking about the phishing platform. So here in Redes, we have a phishing platform that is shared in all ADP group. So every organization within the ADP group uses this phishing platform. Here in this slide, we have several of the most frequent and most known platforms in the market are, and like KnowBe4, Terra Nova Security, Cofense, etc. And we have one of these solutions, and this solution is very important because with this tool you can deploy campaigns more often, and you can target groups within these campaigns. You can target groups that are very specific. For example, we have users that can access remotely our network, and we can make campaigns specifically for them. So it's a very important tool, and I think this is one of the most useful tools we have in-house.
Mm-hmm. And just to complement Miguel, so the plan, we still haven't done the first one, but we are planning that one right now, is to deploy a phishing campaign to our external users, so the employees of our suppliers who access our OT network. And this tool is very important in the sense that it allows us to deploy such campaign. Okay. We will be happy to share the next steps after we have done that campaign. We still haven't done that because, like I showed you, we needed to have a clause in the contractual requirements that legally allowed us to deploy these phishing campaigns with our suppliers. This was something that we had to work with our legal department, and we have managed to do so. So now most of our OT contracts have this clause, and we will be performing briefly this first phishing or smishing, because the platform also allows for smishing. And in Portugal, smishing is a reality, that will allow us to deploy also to our suppliers.
Exactly. So in this next slide, there are 3 examples of our last campaigns. The first is like Joanna is telling, and someone is asking on a chat, and I can tell you what smishing is. Smishing is like just an email phishing, but instead of an email is a SMS text. So it is sent through a phone. We done 3 campaigns in this. In this slide is showing the last 3 campaigns that we made. The left one is a smishing example. So we sent an SMS for our employees, and with the team Rock in Rio, that is a Portuguese music festival, and we were telling that we would give them tickets to the festival. So the contest was pretty legit because EDP is a Rock in Rio sponsor, so the results were good in our point of view. In a point of view that we could test them with the spear phishing campaign. In the right side, we have an email, a phishing email that used the Ukrainian war context. That it is also a spear phishing because EDP was also retrieving funds to help Ukrainian war. So we made a campaign. It was very mediatic here in Portugal that EDP was helping Ukraine. So we took advantage of this team and made an email to our employees. And the third one, it was about the office, and this one was made for establishing the baseline. That means the other ones were spear phishing, so targeted specifically for redes, but this office one could be sent for everybody. So we would like to comprehend what are the minimum level that our employees were aware of. So this one, we made it a little bit easier to comprehend what maturity level were we in.
And these more simple, let's say, campaigns are important to establish, like Miguel said, a baseline. And since we have specific targets and KPIs defined within our ISMS system regarding phishing, clicks in phishing, and also submitted credentials in phishing campaigns that we organize, we needed to know the baseline that for all our employees, how aware they were, so that we could define the targets for next year. Okay, so defining targets is also very important within the organization. And Miguel, thank you. Just to wrap up, I know we're a minute late already. There's so much things that we are planning to do and that we will address in the future. Monitoring also the service of our suppliers in terms of cybersecurity matters. Incident response, vulnerability correction, corrective maintenance is very important, and we are working on that in a level that we are still not being able to do. So having a global vision and reporting back to the board, and also because we had some incidents this year, having a supplier cyber attack checklist so that we know, so all teams know what to do in case a supplier is under attack and what should we do, so that everyone can act swiftly and immediately, to address this incident in our suppliers. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Right, so Michael, if you'd like to come and join us. And so this afternoon we've addressed in the first session social engineering as a service, then we've gone on to look at third-party social engineering, and now Michael is going to be talking to us about penetration testing.
Welcome everyone. I hope you enjoyed the talk so far. I certainly did. Now we move on to the third topic, which is kind of indirectly related to social engineering in a sense that it's more focused on what do we do to verify whether all the tricks and tips that we provide to our employees, whether it's technical or training, fail. What do we do then, right? Or how can we verify the effectiveness of these things? So the topic of today's presentation is kind of when do we pick penetration test as the means to do that, and when it may not be the best one for the goal function. So starting with what are the first 4 big questions that are usually being asked in OT security when you're an asset owner or an asset operator. So first of all, we want to know, do we have a problem? How big that problem is? What can we do about it? What are our options? And what will we do about it? Right. So which of the options has the best value for money? Sorry for that. And to answer these questions, basically we perform some form of a security assessment. One of those forms is penetration test. There are multiple others. So I try to list the main ones. There's probably more, or depending on kind of what your understanding of these things is, there might be more. But these are the sort of usual suspects. So as you can see, there are multiple options next to penetration testing, and I'm going to kind of double click on some of them and try to give you a sense of when penetration test is the right solution to answer those 4 questions, and when you might be better off with one of the other options. So starting with vulnerability scan, which is, by the way, quite often confused with a penetration test because it's usually related. It's an element of a penetration test to perform a vulnerability scan. Although if the penetration test is actually more advanced, then the penetration testing team would actually avoid doing an actual scan, assuming that there is some sort of a detection tool in place that would pick it up and potentially kind of kill their attempts to infiltrate your networks sooner than they are successfully doing so. But again, if you're just looking for, what are the vulnerabilities in my software, then a vulnerability scan might be the way to go. You can do a simple documentation analysis, depending on how up to date it is, of course, and what's the coverage of that documentation. Usually the modern sites or newer ones that had a proper vendors that would actually give those documentation to you as a customer if you're an operator of an asset. But analyzing those documentation can get a lot of information to the assessment team, right? It can describe network segmentation. It can describe, all the policies and procedures in place. Of course, it's just a piece of paper, so it's one thing to be on paper, it's another thing to be reality. But still, for certain purposes, documentation analysis is a perfect way to answer some of these questions without the need to go for any of the other means, let alone doing a penetration test. You can do a configuration check to just log into an asset, check what's the configuration with regards to hardening, what sort of software is installed on it, what sort of privileges users have, all these kind of things that you can check on a given server, workstation, or a controller, at your SCADA system or a substation automation system to confirm whether it's following your existing configuration guidance or just general good practice with regards to a cybersecurity configuration of your host. Again, without yet jumping into a penetration test. You can do a questionnaire. If you're an asset owner that operates, multiple sites around the world, and we sometimes work with operators that have hundreds of sites. So to do a penetration test, or actually some of the other means of answering those 4 big questions on all those hundreds of sites would be extremely expensive, right? So sometimes we use just a simple questionnaire to get some basic information out of the site personnel that is familiar with their given facility, to give us some way to narrow down the number of sites and the scope of the additional assessments that we would want to perform. Personal interviews is a very powerful tool. I mean, the people working on these facilities are usually quite knowledgeable about what they work with. So by just answering them a couple of questions, we can get a lot of data that would otherwise need to be quite costly to obtain by doing the penetration testing. Last but not least, physical inspection. So when we perform a security assessment that does not involve a penetration test, we can do a lot of additional checks if we actually physically are there, right? We can check physical access controls, we can check fire detection and prevention means, we can check HVAC in the server room and so on. So a lot of the things that penetration tests would just not include. So that's another kind of one of the reasons to consider, like, what is exactly the scope of a penetration test that obviously has its limits, right? And physical checks, it's one of them. Now, a penetration test will basically try to simulate what an attacker could do to cause a cyber incident. That can be a simulation of an external attacker, that can be a simulation of an insider who is, for example, an employee and already has legitimate access to the corporate network, and they would want to branch into a control systems network, or just kind of limit their attack to the corporate IT of kind of looking after either some intellectual property or just doing what is most common these days, which is just performing a ransomware attack because it's a very commercially viable scenario for them to follow. And a penetration test of a, let's say, medium-sized industrial facility. I'm sorry for being kind of biased towards that, but my background is in OT, so some of the ideas that I'll be sharing are more towards the control systems environment rather than just a regular corporate IT. So assessing a medium-sized industrial facility, or let's say your main SCADA control center and a couple of main substations, would give or take between 20 to 60 man days, depending on the complexity of the environment, what sort of systems are there, what sort of interfaces exist there, how deep they can go, and so on. But give or take, it's about that ballpark. So with the plethora of tricks a pen test may try to exploit, trying to guess a brute force a password, to doing a really step-by-step methodical attack that could potentially simulate what an insider could do, right? Kind of remembering the zero trust mindset of the first presentation, right? That's what a penetration test would try to exploit. They can do a man-in-the-middle attack, and all these other tricks that can be valuable in kind of verifying what security things are in place. And at the end, what you would be getting out of the penetration test is the following things. So you would get some kind of a list of identified issues, right? Issues, vulnerabilities, however you want to call it. Basically, a list of findings that a penetration test or penetration testing team identified in the environment. You would get an explanation of how these issues or findings or vulnerabilities could be exploited to lead to an incident, right? I mean, the fact that the vulnerability exists, if it's not exploitable in a realistic way, except maybe in a lab somewhere, then it's not really a vulnerability per se. So you would get usually some kind of an explanation of how that could be exploited. You would also get some kind of a ranking, one vulnerability depending on how easy it is to exploit, how likely it is to exploit, and what kind of damage can it cause. Will have a different priority than another one, right? So usually you get some kind of a rating, either low, medium, high, or more advanced, going into the context of a given facility or a given system, and kind of trying to translate this to some sort of financial impact. And last but not least, you would get a recommendation, like what do you do about it so that it's no longer existing, and the next time the penetration test is done, or if someone actually tries to attack you, that vulnerability would be killed, and this avenue at least is no longer there. So if you look at these things, pretty much all of them would be delivered by any of the other types of an assessment. In fact, the recommendation part for a penetration test is usually quite limited, right? Because by definition, penetration testing usually focuses on computer systems, right? It doesn't go out into the context of a given system and so on, right? So the recommendation would be, how do I put it, kind of targeting the symptoms, so to speak. You have missing patches, you have some weak or default passwords, you have some software that is installed on your host that shouldn't be there and it happens to be vulnerable, but it doesn't really go into the root cause of that issue. Because from a penetration tester's perspective, as it would be if it was an actual attacker, they couldn't care less why the patch is missing, right? Or why this software is misconfigured, or why this password is weak, right? They just care that it's there, they can exploit it, they can use it to actually cause damage, or kind of pivot into the more important systems out of that. So that's where the other assessment types may be more handy if the recommendation is the key thing for you. Now, to kind of boil it down into where I think the penetration tests give a lot of value and where the other options might be a better idea. So I would go with a different way of assessing things if I had zero knowledge about a given site. Reason being that if it's the first assessment that I'm doing there and I know not much about it, I don't know what's there, what sort of security features are there, I would be risking that I would waste time and money to kind of figure out the basic stuff during the penetration test that I could first figure out by just asking a question or doing a questionnaire assessment or checking configuration. And I also wouldn't do a penetration test if I wanted to have a comprehensive scope. Again, penetration test by definition, has its limitation in terms of what it's checking, right? It's not going to tell you whether you have a backup copy in place, whether you are able to restore it in time. It's not going to tell you much about, how trained your people are in responding to a phishing scheme, right? It may do this a little bit if the penetration test include a phishing campaign, but penetration test is usually more about kind of other stuff than just phishing. When I would do penetration test is kind of a next step. After these assessments are done, issues are fixed, and penetration test is a great tool to actually verify effectiveness of existing security measures. Not to check if they are there, that can be done by asking a question. Not to figure out the root cause of things. I can just ask a question: do you patch your system regularly? If the answer is no, there is no point for me to do a penetration test or a vulnerability scan to give you a list of 1,300 missing patches. It's a waste of money and time. But if a site is considered to be okay, we've done some things there, we have a firewall in place, we have antivirus software in place, we have a bunch of other tools that would limit the likelihood or make it much more difficult to penetrate this system or this environment, that's where penetration testing comes handy, right? Because you can really verify whether it works or not. And the last sort of a tricky case is sometimes when you're dealing with a stakeholder that just wouldn't believe it until they see it, right? So you can do all sorts of questionnaires, interviews, documentation analysis, and explain to the asset owner that, these are the scenarios that someone with access to your network or someone with just access to the internet could exploit to get into your environment. But if the stakeholder is like, well, it's all kind of theoretical, maybe it'll happen, maybe not, then a penetration test might be a good option to just show them, this is where I was on the network. I was kind of in the same place as any other employee on the internet or within the office network. And this is a screenshot from your SCADA system that I could start clicking in and kind of shut down a grid or a power station. That really kind of opens the eyes of some, stakeholders that, again, just won't believe theoretical explanation. And then the pen test come handy. So with that, I hope it kind of helps you, make a decision between pen test and something else if you ever land in a position to do so. And looking forward to the panel.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. It's wonderful. We've got everyone on screen now. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for your presentations. That's absolutely wonderful to see also not only the sort of what the progress and the trends are, but also in the solutions that are being implemented and applied. So we have one question to start with for Michael. And the question is, what is the best software for an energy management system for a microgrid system? A suggestion for an open source if it exists.
An open source one, yeah. I've seen that question before, and honestly, I couldn't name one that would fit everybody's needs. Microgrid especially is such a kind of tricky environment to deal with because it kind of depends on what exactly is your microgrid consisting of. Is it wind farms? Is it solar? Is it conventional? What does it have to interface with? Because usually that system operates in some kind of a context of a SCADA, and it depends kind of where that SCADA comes from. What sort of energy management do you plan to do, right? Or do you just plan to kind of optimize the route between the source and destination of a given power? Or is it more to kind of related to the energy market system to kind of sell energy? So again, I'm more of a security guy, so I couldn't really advertise any of the solutions. But whether I would go for open source, I don't know, to be honest. Considering the amount of knowledge and kind of post-implementation support that you might be missing afterwards, I would strongly consider getting something commercial with a contract. It's obviously going to be more pricey, but it's easy to say on open source when you're just kind of building a system, but in the long-term support and kind of expecting some additional integrations in the future, again, microgrid is a very dynamic thing, right? It's literally just being built as we speak in a few spots. Then it's kind of hard to rely on the open source community for it. So sorry, I don't have an answer to you in terms of naming a software, but between the open source and the kind of commercial, I would well, consider the risks of open source to start with. I would use it for, let's say, kind of research and development phase, just to figure out, if you have some few basic use cases that you want to use it to, and you want to test if there is business value coming out of those use cases, and then the software is just kind of tool to get it at the end of the day. To test that, that's a good thing to have. But afterwards, I would consider something that has long-term support that you can just, you have a throat to choke, and it's not yours.
Okay, and Floyd, who posed the question, just provides the context that he had solar in mind. I don't know if that makes any difference at all, Michael.
Yeah, that's good. But again, I'm more of a security guy, so I couldn't name the software that would be best for, let's say, functional means. Sorry, I couldn't have one for you.
No problem. Another question for you, Michael, is there any way to directly exploit OT networks, or does it always come through an IT vulnerability?
Yeah, there are definitely ways to directly exploit it, and we always try to convince customers that even if your network is completely disconnected from a corporate one, which might be the case for your substations, even for your SCADA, there is still people coming in there with laptops to program your substation equipment, and those can be contractors or your own employees. You can have a bunch of USBs being used to transfer files in and out, whether it's backup copies or some newer version of the application. You can have some ways of remotely accessing these systems because you use it so that your administrators in the middle of the night, if they need to troubleshoot something, they don't need to drive there or fly there in some cases. So it doesn't have to originate from the IT network. It's kind of a usual suspect, but again, that one interface with IT is usually the one that kind of gets some attention of your security team, and chances are it's give or take, addressing at least some basic security features, and all these sort of ways to get into the OT, circumventing the main channel between IT and OT is the one that I would kind of start focusing on. So it's definitely doesn't have to start from OT. In fact, it may start from following on the second presentation from your partners, right? That your substation or your SCADA can be connected with to exchange some signals with their SCADA or their RTUs. And that connection might be kind of directly at the level that goes beyond, sort of below the IT network, right? So those are the interfaces that you also might be focusing on, which have nothing to do with corporate IT network.
And I would add, if I may, kind of the focus on what you already mentioned, like service equipment. I mean, you covered basically IT, the enterprise architecture attached to OT. We covered as a supply chain, other partners that connect. But in my experience, like at least of similar importance is service laptops, engineers running around with stuff. They need all kinds of virtual machines in order to connect to outdated PLCs. So they have a Windows XP virtual machine and a Windows 7 virtual machine and a Windows whatnot virtual machine, and half of them have never been checked in any way. So it's kind of a good rule of thumb to try to make sure that any service equipment which you connect to your production equipment is of the same level of security, respect to hardening, virus checking, and so on, as your actual production equipment. So if you can, and that's probably a hard thing to do, but try to make it the policy to yourself to kind of get everyone's equipment that goes in being of the same level of security that you also look after when you look for your production equipment.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jan. We have a question for you, actually, Jan, and that is, are computers also shouting SSIDs while being connected to a Wi-Fi?
That was, I just noticed after I said that sentence that was a bit misleading. Usually they shout that out when they are not connected anywhere. Once there is a connection established, they stop because they already are connected. So that happens if you like walk around, let's say in a train, where you're usually not connected anywhere, right? So then they shout out, or in an airport, or in a restaurant. But when you already, so I kind of explained that earlier.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, and we do have another question for you, which is, would it be safer to utilize fingerprint scans or face scans instead of using passwords? which have to be changed every 3 months on workstations of users?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say, so what you're talking about is obviously multi-factor authentication. Usually you have 3 different things that you can use to authenticate. You can either take something that you know, which would be a password because you have to remember it, or you can take something that you have, like a dongle that you need to plug in somewhere, or you can take something that, like a fingerprint or an iris scan. And looking at it from a mile high plane, all of them are kind of similar in their individual security. But it gets better if you combine them. So you cannot say one of them is better than the other. You can say that you improve if you take 2 of them instead of only 1. So use a password and a fingerprint or iris reader or whatever there may be. And then you can even kind of loosen a bit on your password requirements so that you don't have to be like 12 characters and it has to have an extra character. And then at the end, you have like your favorite hometown and a 1 and an exclamation mark at the end, because that's what everyone does, right? So yeah, use 2-factor instead of only 1.
Right.
So,
Okay.
To add to that, again, kind of coming to an OT context, that's sort of where I come from. We played with fingerprint scanners in one operator that I worked with, and it is obviously safer than a password, but in majority of cases, it wouldn't actually replace password, because you have to have that sort of a backup way to log in if that fingerprint scanner doesn't work because your finger is dirty or whatever else happened, right? The same for face scan. So there's usually, or at least I haven't seen it, that the password is actually completely disabled to be supplemented by these other means, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. That, you know, the amount of headache that administrators or security team would get if you implemented either a fingerprint scanner or something else, and it doesn't work and they cannot log in to work, would be just immense. Second thing to comment on, in terms of changing the passwords every so often, the newer sort of guidance on that is actually suggesting that it shouldn't be some kind of a default approach without considering more. Because what it translates into a lot of times is that
there seems to be some feedback. Jan, is that your machine?
I don't think so. I didn't have it before, but now it's gone.
No, it's
so people come up with some kind of a pattern, right? They just their net password has like a 1 number at the end, or they come up with some kind of a, anything that once you guess one password, then you pretty much can easily figure out the next one that comes in line, right? So it's actually guided that unless you have a good reason to think that password was leaked, or someone was brute forcing it, or the complexity pattern was such that it's highly, well, not highly, but likely that someone was brute forcing it, then you can live with that password a bit longer than, let's say, 3 months, or even not changing it at all, especially if it's a password that is sort of deeper in the environment, right? It's not accessible remotely. It's not just a regular user password that is used a lot, and there are a lot of opportunities from, looking behind somebody's back to brute forcing it to actually steal it. It might be a better option to just properly secure that password, but not cause a headache that is required to change that password. Because especially with regards to accounts that are, for example, service accounts, right? It's not a human account anymore. It's actually a system. To change a password regularly, it's a pain in the neck to start with, let alone the scenario where you can actually break things from working. Right, so it's changing a password is one way to do this, but it's it requires some consideration if it's really the best option to go with.
Okay.
And just to add in that topic, if I may, Mandan, also implementing an MFA solution, depending on the system that we are talking about, it could be a hard task. So, and like Michael was saying, if we are talking about implementing MFA for our dispatch workstations, we have to guarantee that the solution, if it fails, it will allow for an alternative authentication method, because if something happens, the workstation needs to be available for our dispatch operators. It could not be in the way of operating the network. So And implementing
Yeah,
MFA in some systems like SCADA, it could be a hard task. So it should be well chosen, the possible solution, let's say, with the backup also authentication method.
Yeah, that may have also come over a bit misleading. That was kind of a response to the answer, but not a suggestion for use in SCADA, because I mean we had the question.
No,
right?
of course.
I mean, I would even say that in SCADA very often you have alternative barriers to passwords, like for example physical access protection. Like usually you don't have the HMIs to some control systems just plainly accessible in the open field to anyone who passes by, right? You have them in an enclosed room, so that's already one barrier in the first place. And if you count that in, then you can ease on your other barriers, being passwords and what other barriers you might have. So not at all. It's a good idea to have multi-factor in SCADA. I even have lots of systems which do not have any authentication at all, and that's on purpose, because they're assumed to be available all the time directly when you walk there. Like think of a ship and a radar. Imagine you have a captain on the bridge and he has to log in every time he wants to look on the radar. That's stupid, right? And it's not a problem because you don't get there in the first place. It's a locked room. So it's okay if it is openly accessible.
Yeah. So kind of going back to the original question about the fingerprint scanner or retina scan, kind of thinking broader than just these two examples, there are more ways to kind of secure a given session than just authenticating the user, right? If you for example are concerned that you don't want to impose some security authentication method that would be considered a pain in the neck for users, and obviously user experience is important these days, even for us security, which we would just lock everything out and kind of prevent people from using it. But you can also kind of play with authentication the machine also, right? That the user cannot just do it from just any computer, whether it's their private one or somebody stole their credentials and trying from something else. But you can also authenticate the machine itself, starting from the software with some certificate, going down to the hardware itself, right, through some TPM modules that are being sold with pretty much every modern laptop. You can utilize what Microsoft is implementing, all the new features like the PIN code that is very simple to remember, and it only works on that given machine, right? Even if someone steals it, they wouldn't be able to use that code from another machine, right? Because it's kind of intimately linked to a password that is hosted on that particular computer. So there are a lot of ways to kind of move away from login and passwords without yet jumping into something like time-consuming ways of authenticating. All right, so it's just a matter of kind of testing it, maybe paying for it if it doesn't come out of the box with operating system or some applications. But again, there are ways that do not have to jump into additional hardware, which is needed and expensive for a fingerprint scanning or retina scanning. But at the same time, it's way more secure than just a username and password.
Okay. Yeah, and here's a question for you. When you have systems from the 80s, how do you mitigate the same level of security statement?
Well, as far as my experience goes, you don't mitigate by reaching the same level as you would if it was a new system. So basically, what you are left with is isolation. So just treat that system as a one piece of whatever valuable asset that you protect, and you kind of protect it on the borders of it. So you don't install additional software on it because it might be prevented or it's not supported and so on. You just secure the network of it. You put in place a lot of procedures that make sure that nobody who is not authorized can physically get to these hosts, let alone remotely. You make a very restrictive management of change process. So before someone does connect to that system through a USB or some other computer, they do some reconfiguration, because updates are no longer provided to a system in the 80s and so on. So before someone is allowed to do anything with that system that could potentially lead to an infection, there are a lot of approvals to be obtained. So you have some kind of soft ways of dealing with that. The first thing I would actually start with is make sure that if for some reason that system goes down, whether it's a hack or a malware or just a hardware failure, I actually have a process in place to bring it back up, and with an acceptable time, as opposed to just working under stress and trying to figure out where is that fellow that knew how this system works, because we are all just end users of it. So that's how I would deal with the legacy system, right? Isolating on the outskirts procedures and making sure I can restore it, right? Literally down to hardware, because with a system from the 80s, chances are the hardware is no longer in store, so you might be left with some kind of refurbished parts. So it's kind of good to have them in storage, for example, if you need to replace that system.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts on that question?
Just, I mean, stressing what Michael said, and Ian already talked about it before. So implementing mitigating controls.
Yeah.
I don't know the word in English. Compensatory controls, I would say. Physical access to these legacy systems are very important, and yeah, backups in place, and with a regular process of having these systems backed up and testing if we can restore these systems.
Okay, we have a question here. Sorry, go ahead.
To add to that one thing came to my mind. What you can try doing as one of those compensating measures is to start monitoring that system in a passive way. So assuming that you can actually make it so, or it's built already so that you can, for example, has a mirror port on one of the switches, then you can start passively monitoring the traffic that goes in and out of that system. And you can have some signatures that would tell you that, you don't have that patch or that software is vulnerable, but on the network, you can detect the traffic that is clearly attempting to exploit it. And then you can actively block it, or, at least you can get an alert.
And now
so even though you cannot prevent these things from happening, you will know when they are, at least in an early stage of an attack or an infection.
And now we come to something which I had the feeling that we were missing before, which is that it's not only about doing like pen tests every once in a while to see if there is something right now which I missed before, but it's a kind of a continuous security operation going on, which requires some sort of monitoring of your ingress and egress, of your going in and going out, or even of the system themselves. So go find yourself a vendor that has connections into your industry, and that to your industry, because the most important thing is there are lots of vendors that do security operating, right? But the most important bit is that the guys understand the processes of your industry. They understand how your equipment works, what is important, what's not important, what's critical, what's not critical. If that thing here turns double as fast as yesterday, is that a risk of blowing up, or is that just, I don't know, the air conditioner in the control room? So find a security operating vendor that monitors your equipment and that understands your specific industry. That would be kind of one of the key suggestions on top of like a test, which is only a one moment in time way of looking at it.
Okay, thank you. Miguel, we have a question for you. When running phishing campaigns, do you do social engineering, and what's the limit that you can go to?
Right.
Actually, there is no limit. When when I was presenting, I told you about the Ukrainian campaign, and we had some users talking about it because it's not ethical, I guess. But in fact, that an attacker could use everything to do engineering, social engineering. So we have to take that in consideration. So we try to do campaigns for redes that are very spear phishing, so very specific for redes, and that's the way we like to do it, because that is the most difficult test for them. And sometimes we have to put some things in front of in front of these campaigns, like ethical. But in this case, because the theme was the Ukrainian war, we had some people disliking the campaign, but we have to try and have this in consideration when doing it.
I would add that the limit is related to our resources to do the social engineering campaigns, because if we could, we would do phishing campaigns as well, because this is also a reality here in Portugal and in our organization. So we have some phishing calls targeting our employees. As long as we have the resources to do a campaign, a social engineering campaign, of course we will do it.
Mm-hmm.
I would add there that, yeah, as far as the limits go, if you can call them limits, I guess don't overdo it in terms of frequency.
Yes,
the goal
definitely.
for these phishing campaigns is to kind of keep people
That's a
on
good
the
point.
edge, but not get them annoyed, which can always happen, right? And you know, I'm doing security for over a decade. I still fell for these campaigns twice in my life because they just kind of randomly caught me off guard. One case was when there was an email saying that, hey, we are kind of a coffee company providing coffee machines to this office. I was working on a customer's email, and it just so happened that was like one of the worst coffees ever. So I figured, yeah, I'm going to tell you what I think about your coffee, right? And there was a phishing campaign. At another time, it was some email about some missing invoice, and literally that morning, I was dealing with our internal accounting about some invoice, and it just randomly happened that I fell for it, right? So I do appreciate these things when they happen.
Michael,
Just to finish, one additional limit I would put, when you're crafting these phishing campaigns, try to avoid a situation when someone will see the email and they will think that it's, you know, from, again, their accounting or someone. They will actually pick up the phone, call them, and start yelling that, you know, what are you talking about? I fixed that issue, just to kind of avoid, you know, someone saying that this, you know, supposedly trying to do something good campaign actually caused some issues, if not financial damage, right? So it's kind of good to be careful about these things.
yeah, those points are really good. Actually, we heard recently a phishing platform vendor talking about the amount of phishing campaigns that some organizations are deploying to their workforce. And of course, people get a bit annoyed. You don't want your colleagues, your employees to be against you. You want them by your side. You want them being your first line of defense. So you want to create some kind of, how's the word? Empathy towards these topics. And one thing that we are doing, rather than just overwhelming our colleagues with phishing campaigns, the last one that we did, the simple one, the Office 365, was asking our colleagues, why do they keep on clicking and submitting confidential information? We want to know, why are they doing this? And they told us why they were doing it. I was multitasking. I don't know what phishing is. So when someone tells us they don't know what phishing is, we know exactly what to do with that person. I thought it was a true email. And when you receive an email, supposedly by Office 356, I mean, why do you think this is legit? And by having these answers, we can tackle this these topics more specifically, okay? And we know where to go through from now on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe one additional thing came to my mind in terms of maybe thinking that something might be a limit, but it actually shouldn't, is to use, you know, ongoing events around the world or some delicate topics in those phishing campaigns. Like, you know, this campaign that we are gathering money to and our company is supplying, please submit. And, you know, someone may think that, well, it's a tricky topic. We're professionals. We don't want to talk about whatever war or female rights or something like that in our emails. But that's what an attacker would use, right?
Yes,
so it's actually good, as long as it's, you know, not offending anyone in terms of content. It's actually good to use these things, because it's not just about, you know, an invoice is missing or something like that. Even so, making these campaigns too easy to spot will kind of kill the point in the first place. So they should be crafted in a way that an attacker might attempt it.
Yeah.
Joanna, there's a question here. I think you've answered it in part, but maybe there's more to it, which is what happens if a user gets caught in your phishing campaign?
That's a good question. So actually, we are not, I mean, I know that this is different throughout the world, but in Portuguese, we cannot sue an employee for failing a phishing campaign or nothing of that kind, okay? Or institute a disciplinary process, nothing of that kind. So what we will be working on for now, I mean, if they are failing, we can address them to training, okay? And we have an online quiz about phishing that we did, and we have dedicated live courses that we can appoint that person to attend, okay? This is what we are doing now. Our ambition is to develop a cyber risk, develop a model to measure cyber risk of employees, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the results of these phishing campaigns will feed this model. It will be definitely one of the variables of the model.
Right. Okay, great.
Definitely never, shame an individual who clicked on it and it from your systems, right? You can do some statistics like, in these countries we're doing better and so on, but never, blame an individual.
No, never.
Like I do security, I still fall for these things sometimes, right?
Never disclose. Yeah, just adding that never disclose the results of your phishing campaigns to directors. That, I mean, they will ask you definitely, but you shouldn't disclose that, okay? So the results should be aggregated when communicating the results to the organization.
And Joanna, there's somebody asking the question, did I understand correctly that you do phishing campaigns against your suppliers as well?
Yes, now we have a clause in all of our contracts, OT network contracts, that allow us to do so, because this was a legal issue if we were in right or not to do so, to monitorize the emails of our suppliers. But now we are legally authorized to do so. So we are planning the first phishing campaign to suppliers.
Right, okay.
And again, with no consequences, okay? We are not at that stage yet, just to monitor the level of awareness of our suppliers.
Right, okay. This is a question generally for anybody on the panel who'd like to answer it. And perhaps, again, we've addressed it to an extent, but perhaps we can go deeper. How would you separate the OT system from the IT system? Data centers and the like require large amounts of upkeep and touch vectors, which seems alien to a SCADA system.
It's a complex question to answer.
Yeah,
we could
yeah.
be here all afternoon.
We need to listen to an answer. I guess obviously it depends on your starting point, right? If, like you mentioned, you have a lot of interfaces and it's a bit of a complex thing, I suppose I would start with the ones that are reaching to the more exposed hosts, because it's more likely that these would be attacked first rather than something that just has one interface and so on through some other system and so on, because you have to start somewhere to deal with that, and just kind of make a list of those interfaces, try to kill it one after another. Do consider also, the fact that the interface is there does not directly should lead to a conclusion, okay, then we need to secure it. You should kind of take a step back and think, okay, is that interface even needed? Maybe I can have some kind of a service bus replacing a bunch of those spaghetti interfaces with a single point of access for data. Obviously, it might be a longer term solution, but again, trying to fix segmentation between IT and OT, just kind of agreeing that it is going to be a mess as it is, may not be the best option, right? I would start looking for open text protocols. I still see cases where Telnet or some other stuff like that is used between IT and OT for some historical data or to remotely access some older systems. Those are the low-hanging fruits for an attacker. In fact, that actually might be a good way to include penetration tests, right? So that we'll start from an IT network and we'll just look for the things that lead to an OT network, and they will tell you, out of those 30, these are the 5 that we would go for first as an attacker that does not need to use nation state means to attack you. Kind of fix that and then fix those and move to the next one in line.
Great. Okay. Thank you for those for that answer, Michael. I think this is a good point in which we wrap up. So Michael, Joanna, Miguel, and Jan, thank you all very much for your presentations and your insights. Really appreciate that. And all of our audience members with their questions, thank you for participating fully. So we will be launching a program of cyber aware webinars the last Tuesday of every month from January throughout 2023. We'll keep you informed about those topics and the speakers, so please do join us again. As you can see, this is a free to attend webinar. We just want to help raise the cyber awareness of the technical workforces across the power grid. So do join us again. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you again. Take care all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.